Welcome back, friends, to the Rob Maness Show. This week's going to be a good one. We've got myself, a nuclear operations guy from about 30-something years in the Air Force, and a guest that's got a lot of expertise in the world of nuclear operations at the highest level of the United States. So stick with us. It's going to be a great show. The title of the show is the United States in the correct nuclear alert posture right now? On the fourth day of the war in Ukraine, President Vladimir Putin ordered Russia's nuclear forces into a higher state of alert. The first time the Kremlin had done so since the Russian Federation was established in 1991. Unfortunately, the Biden administration should have countered Putin's order by putting its bombers, nuclear silos, and submarines on a higher alert level to reach parity. Instead, the White House made clear that it had not changed. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations even told the Security Council that Russia was under no threat and chided Putin, quote, for another escalatory and unnecessary step that threatens us all, unquote. The administration went even further and canceled its regularly scheduled firing of an unarmed, combat-ready intercontinental ballistic missile. That is critical to messaging our adversaries that our missiles are reliable and ready. So are these measures de-escalatory, as the administration suggests? I suggest not. They've actually escalated the conflict toward a nuclear exchange between us because we have openly told Putin that he could actually win in a nuclear exchange with us if he strikes first. The exact opposite impression of what nuclear deterrent operations is supposed to produce. Nuclear deterrent ops are intended to keep our foremost in our adversary's mind that he or she will risk complete destruction if they launch on the United States or our allies, but if we don't maintain nuclear alert readiness parity with that adversary, he or she is not seeing that we have the political will and resolve to use our arsenal if necessary. Well, today's guest is a dynamic military and political consultant, New York Times bestselling author, and noted speaker with a history as a U.S. Air Force Combat Pilot, commander, and senior military Air Force Aide to President Bill Clinton, which means he's carried the Nuclear Decision Handbook, aka the football, and been trained on how to guide the President of the United States in its use to first deter a nuclear strike or launch an option if necessary. Retired Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Buzz Patterson, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Rob. We got the band together finally after all these years. I'm sure we've been operating in the same circles and just on different ends. And it's great to be with you finally. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a strange world we live in, Buzz. I mean, we've actually been what I consider friends in the digital space, but we've never actually been able to meet or talk one-on-one for any length of time. So it's good to have you on, and I'm really excited to have you on because a lot of people I've learned over the last few weeks, actually the last month since Russia invaded Ukraine, don't really have a clue as to how nuclear deterrence works and nuclear forces work and nuclear war works. So I'm happy to have somebody on that understands the most senior decision process in the United States about that, because it's very dangerous times that we live in. But you ran for Congress once, right?
Yeah, I ran for California 7 in 2020, Sacramento County, out of the blue. We did really well. We lost, but we ran. Mm-hmm. And I think it's incumbent, I think it's important for our political process to include vets like yourself and myself. I think we bring a fresh approach and an outlook that you're not going to get if you're a career, dog catcher / mayor / assemblyman. Then you get into, federal government. So yeah, we did run. We lost. We might run again at some point. But right now we're back to doing this for the time being. And I got to say, Ron, I think that it's really important that people understand just how. I mean, your intro was perfect because you got to understand that we are really, in my opinion, we are facing the potential use of nuclear weapons for the first time in our lifetimes. I feel the most trepidatious I've been I mean, I was a baby boomer, and we used to do the getting under the desks in elementary school drills back in the 60s and 70s because of the Soviet Union, and now we got the same thing. And I have to agree with you 100% also, Rob, that Biden not escalating or elevating our nuclear posture. What worked so well during the Cold War was mutually assured destruction. Mm-hmm. And then, but when you have a president or a commander in chief that basically is saying, "Hey, if you use these, we will not respond with those," that's a horribly escalating tactic on the part of the Biden administration and our national security team. And I think I think we're really in a very tumultuous time, and very challenging times.
Well, it seems like a small thing. What I pointed out is that we are not at parity with our nuclear alert status, and and we'll talk about that a little bit more in detail later. But obviously, I agree with you. When I write these monologues, I try to put my own operational experience-based opinions or facts into those monologues. But you were, so you're doing this now. I was going to ask you if you were going to run again, because I've run too, and everybody asks me that, and I just say, I'd never say never,
Well, never say never. Yeah, never say never. And we've been asked to run around California. California is a little bit different because you don't have to actually live in your district to run in California. And so we're California residents, and we've been asked to run for governor and some other things. And we're gonna keep our powder dry. And I feel like in some ways, and this, I mean, we're a lot more free to voice our opinions and to make our attacks on different people when we're not running for Congress and running for office than when we are. So I think that you and I can be both tools for conservatives and pro-military folks to engage politically, whether we're in office or we're not. So we're going to take a little respite here and do this for a couple of years and probably run again, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think a lot of people misunderstand that usually when a veteran, most of the time, runs for office, it's not about our ego. It's about we see a need because we're seeing something. In my case, I keep seeing politicians on both sides of the aisle running on certain issues, and then when they get into office at the highest level in the land, they're not doing any of it. It's like they lie to the people to get them to vote for them, and then they go do whatever whoever gave them money says.
Well, that's exactly right, and I think we also probably share this in the fact that we both took an oath. Way back when we took an oath to service to our country, and and when we leave the military, I think that we're not necessarily done serving our country. And I think that you and I were both called to continue to serve. We're doing it in different ways right now. If we run again, then we're doing it in that particular regime. But I have never stopped living out my oath. Here, now this is going to really date me. 41 years later, after taking that oath, I still firmly believe that one of my aspects and being on this planet is to try to serve not only our nation but our communities and my God, and I think that's what we do. And but I do not know a single military guy or girl, Rob, that does not still feel that attraction or that compulsion to want to serve. I mean, I think that's in our blood.
Yes, because we don't take an oath to a person or a political party.
Right.
We take an oath to what every American should be believing in, and new citizens do, and that's to the Constitution.
That's exactly right.
Of the United States, and that's not supposed to change. Now, various administrations may or may not follow the Constitution. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of that in the last few decades, but I think with citizens like us, whether we're in office or not, there's always going to be a constant pressure on the elected people to get back in line with the Constitution of the United States, because that's the only thing that makes this country great. And it needs to be freer because we've seen it's no longer free in many cases. And so we've got some work to do. And they can bet that, when I'm out here, just like you said, I'm going to go at you a lot more aggressively, probably, maybe even more aggressively than I should. But God help you if I ever run for office again, because after what Donald Trump was able to accomplish, even in the face of all of the attacks from within, especially,
Yeah.
we can get this job done if we just have to find the right people, and we can do that from inside or outside.
And we're not sending our best, Rob. I think that as the Republican Party and conservatives, we're not sending our best. I'm
Yeah.
sure we can compare notes about how the political process works in this nation. The fundraising aspect, the strategic, the strategist aspect, the media aspect. I mean, we have the U.S. has a political industry right now, and a lot of people make a lot of money by being a part of that industry.
Sure do.
And if you're not a lifetime participant in the club, you're not going to get the same opportunities that you would either through donations, fundraising, media hits. If unless you have that push, which the Republican Party, I've had both extremes in terms of my opinion and support from the Republican Party. I've had zero support, and then I've had, hey, you're endorsed what you want to do support. So I've seen that entire thing, and it's difficult for an outsider like us to with all of our experience and all of our our combat time and in commanding people and leading people. It's difficult for us to fit in to that industry effectively. Some people can do it, and then there are people that can't. And so I think that we can still be as effective as possible. If I was your wingman in combat, I wouldn't care what what your background was. I'm only caring about you being efficient and doing your job. And I think that's
exactly right.
And I think that's exactly what Congress in Washington D.C. needs. And Trump was the guy. Trump was the guy that showed us it was possible to push back on the establishment, on the swamp. And I 100% believe that there's a swamp in an establishment. I've seen it on both sides over my years. And Trump was the first guy to actually push back. And you're right. We also have enemies domestic on both sides. And we've got to make sure that the American public is aware of those.
Yeah, and we've got an unelected part of the government that you and I both have served in that is, in my opinion, completely out of control, and
Yes.
it has put us in a very dangerous place after they what they did both before Mr. Trump was elected and during his administration, and now they continue to do with all of the craziness and the propaganda narrative and those kind of things. And that gets us to why I wanted you to come on. You used to be a military aide to the President of the United States. And I mentioned in my monologue, you carried the nuclear football. What kind of training did you have to do that? And does that mean you're with the President all the time?
So, yes. So the way that the position is filled is the Pentagon actually reaches out. In my case, they reached out to myself and 5 other Air Force officers to be the Air Force military aide. I was the guy that flew out to Washington. I was the guy that they hired. I was actually hired by Leon Panetta, who at the time was the chief of staff of the White House to President Clinton. And I had 2 weeks of very intensive training prior to stepping into the role as the actual military aide, Air Force military aide. And then we would routinely exercise with the president, and sometimes on a quarterly basis, I would actually visit President Clinton. I traveled with him wherever he went. I had the football, so the football is the black satchel that has the nuclear informations, targets, plan in the football, and then the president has the nuclear codes, credit card size document that he uses to authenticate himself. So we would exercise about once a quarter without the president, and then once a year with the president. And in fact, one time President Clinton actually, we were able to do an exercise where we went to the CIA training grounds and doing a full blown let's do an assessment and see how this thing works, where we actually tied in all of the the triad. We had we always went down through the White House, goes down through the NMCC and the Pentagon, National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, to send out the communications and the orders to as you're aware, bombers, silos, and nuclear equipped subs. And then that's how that process works. And it's a very detailed process. And I actually have to give President Clinton credit. I wrote a very scathing book about it when I retired from the Air Force, but he was actually a pretty quick study, although he did lose the nuclear codes once. I'm sure you want to talk about that at some point.
I do want to talk about that. But so you mentioned that you did a yearly exercise with the president, and the team exercised quarterly more often than that. And you
Right.
got some training. You weren't a bomber or missile officer when you got picked to do this job. So you got some training in that, right? Now I was in the
Yeah.
I worked in the NMCC, that's the National Military Command Center, folks, in what's called the Nuclear Operations Division. So we actually wrote and maintained and trained people on what is termed as the Black Book. It's actually the chairman of the Joint Chiefs Nuclear Decision Handbook. That's the president's book. So I was on that piece of it. So my team that I was on, it wasn't me specifically, but one of those officers who was in charge of training you guys and training the presidents.
Yes. Yeah.
So you guys were all non-political in the military at that time. I can't speak for today because I've been out for 11 years. So you bring these political presidents in, and how did that work for the totally professional, non-political, non-partisan part of the U.S. government interfacing with the boss, who has really come out of a political culture? And you mentioned that culture earlier. Was there some friction there, or
You know what?
was he pretty receptive?
That's a great question. And and this is something that I struggle with almost daily, Rob. And I think that the Secret Service guys and girls that I serve with, and some of the other military folks that were assigned to the White House also struggle with this. And you're exactly right at the top of the show. You talked about the fact that we are, when we take that oath, we are beholden to the Constitution. We're not beholden to a human being, right? So
Right.
I saw the flaws and the chinks in Clinton's armor very early, probably 2 weeks in to my 2 years. So I was there for 2 years. So I saw that there were some issues with him in terms of character and morality and his integrity. And I saw the same things in Mrs. Clinton, which is why I later wrote a book. But in my 2 years there, every single day, Rob, I got up, I looked at myself in the mirror. I said, "Hey, this is going to be another day." And there was no 2 days. Trust me, in the Clinton White House, there were no 2 days that were ever the same. So you had no idea. So you're flying into combat every single day, and you have no idea where the flak's going to come from or what's going to, what the mission requirements are going to be. So that was my situation for 2 years. But I knew that I was beholden to the Constitution and the office, and not the human being, which is how I got through it. And that especially applied when Clinton was getting in trouble with Monica Lewinsky and Paula Jones and the impeachment and all that. I was there for all that. And I was I'm a mission mover, probably a lot like you. I just wanted to get into the jet, fly it, get back safely. And that's the way I treated me. I told my then fiance, now wife of 25 years, then I said, all I want to do is not get the guy hurt or let him embarrass himself.
Yeah.
So on top of the fact that I had the nuclear football, I'm actually having to kind of corral these young staffers who have no idea what's going on in the world and make sure that they don't embarrass the U.S., embarrass the president. And even though I didn't respect the man, I was around him 24/7 for 2 years. We got along great personally. But you kind of have to get across that, I always knew that if it was a legal order coming down and I respected that it was a legal order, I was going to do my job. And if I didn't think it was a legal order, I was not going to do my job. And that's kind of how I got through those 2 years.
Yeah, and we train every person in the U.S. military that it's their responsibility not to follow an unconstitutional order. So
that's exactly right.
So what the colonel just said is not unusual to my ears, but it might be unusual to some of our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, Yeah.
But it's an important thing to know, because at one point, it's not this way now, but when I left the military in 2011, military officers were about 80% the most respected
Yeah.
job function individuals in the United States. 80% of the people trusted them.
Right.
It's much lower than that now, and that's part of the issue and why I wanted to talk about this. So you never, in your experience, in your time in the mid '90s, mid to late '90s, you would never have. Let me see if I'm characterizing this right. Would you have ever even had the thought cross your mind that something flaky was going to happen with nuclear command and control because of who was president?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
was
And
it
there's,
all always pretty tight, like what we know it is? I mean, I've worked in the system. I know how tight.
no, there were times there were times that I thought, especially when Clinton was, there was a really black time in the White House, Rob. I think my last 6 months there. After, from the time that Monica Lewinsky lost, I mean, the Monica Lewinsky story hit the press, and that President Clinton lost the nuclear codes, there was like a 4 or 5 or 6 month really really dark period in the White House, and I didn't think that he was emotionally um, able, possibly, to carry out whatever he would, whatever he would want to do nuclear wise. I always was, that little time period was very troubling for me, and I'm sure the guys and girls that are doing it right now for Biden, one of them's in, or probably more than one of military aides are with Biden right now in Poland. If I was the nuclear football person right now for Joe Biden, I'd be on high alert. I mean, I really would, because I don't think he's mentally stable enough, or does he have the wherewithal, right, to make that decision? So there were times where I kind of questioned whether President Clinton might be not capable, and that's when I was relying on the system too. And the system probably better than I do.
Yeah.
I knew that it was human based. I knew there were going to be other decision makers on that communication. I knew that there were going to be, all the Joint Chiefs and all the unified syncs were going to be on there, and I knew that it didn't have to be a lieutenant colonel, telling them, hey, this guy is, he's not quite right. I knew that those people would possibly engage. Now they tried to use that against President Trump at one point in time. The wokers in the Pentagon. That's what I call the defense secretary now and General Milley. The wokers, were concerned about Trump's mental well-being. You know what? If I had been Trump's military aide, I wouldn't have had a problem. He's prone to flying off the handle. I understand that, but I would have thought that Trump was in a right place mentally, in terms of his capacity to actually process a situation. And Clinton asked some really intelligent questions. So I had to brief him about I briefed him about once a quarter. And I would go in and ask him if he had any questions about the process, if he needed to break out the codes or talk about the decision handbook, or any of that stuff that was there's other stuff in the football too. It's not just nuclear. There's electronic broadcasting system stuff. There's 25th Amendment stuff. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that the aide has to be smart on. Obviously the most threatening from a mankind perspective is the nuclear aspect of that. And Clinton was pretty good about asking, I thought, very intuitive questions. Well, then he lost the nuclear codes, so we're not really sure how focused he was at that point in time. But so you can see my day-to-day swing in terms of who am I working for, and is the guy capable or not?
So hypothetically, if you and your president that you were the aide for were in the situation where Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine, and then 4 days later he just comes out and he says, "Hey, I'm increasing my nuclear alert force posture."
Right.
What would you have been talking to the president about?
Matching it, and I think that at least matching it. And there were a couple of times, I wasn't a senior advisor to President Clinton in terms of military affairs. He had his Joint Chiefs, he had all the 4-stars. They would come over frequently, but I did jog with him. I did go to the golf course with him frequently. I did watch college football with him frequently, and occasionally he would say, "Hey, Buzz, what do you think about this? The Bosnian War? What's going on there? What can we do there?" And so I would just shoot the shit with him a little bit and talk about what I thought, as a junior officer. But I think he listened, which I found remarkable. He listened, and then he would actually then echo those sentiments in meetings that I was not allowed to talk at. But I was at. So I would be in the back of the room and hearing him tell the 4-stars exactly what I had just told him 3 hours earlier. So he was like that. I mean, there's a lot of things about President Clinton I didn't care for personally. But he was a listener. He considers himself to be an intellect. He doesn't want to. He listens to all the voices in the room. He doesn't come in there and like probably Trump did, come in there and say, "This is what we're going to do." No, he listened to all the voices in the room, and I found that sometimes a good thing, Rob, and sometimes a bad thing. I remember when we had Osama bin Laden in our sights on more than one occasion when I was there, and he chose not to act. When we were watching the CIA ops, and we were watching the Delta Force guys, and on the TV screen on the drone, and he chose not to pull the trigger. So there were times that I thought he was really engaged, and there were times I thought this guy just doesn't get it. So kind of an enigma.
So Bill Clinton, an enigma. I mean, I talk to people every day that still say he's one of the greatest presidents we've ever had. And I think economically, from an economic perspective, because he ended up with a Republican House of Representatives in Congress, he became
worked out for him.
A better president than he would have been otherwise in that regard. So, continuing with our situation here, though, the Biden administration, President Biden, did not match Putin's parity, and I've gotten video that I've put out even before Putin made his announcement that Topol M's, that's the big mobile ICBM that we let them keep their mobile systems while we stayed with fixed silos in the nuclear negotiations, in the arms negotiations, which puts us at a disadvantage because we have no defense system. There's no defense against these things. They're on the move, though. The Topol M's are on the move, and they're on the move even more now after he increased his readiness. And here we don't do any of the things that we, in my opinion, should be doing to maintain deterrence. And if we had a defense system, it would be a different story, but we don't. I mean, the only defense you have is mutual assured destruction.
That's exactly right. I mean, it's interesting because I'm old enough to remember when Ronald Reagan, I was not in the Air Force yet, when Ronald Reagan was pursuing Star Wars. And I thought at the time it was a great idea, and the Democrats kind of poo-pooed that. And we did a lot of great research, and we did some development, but we never followed through. And we don't have that capability. We don't have anything like Israel has the Iron Dome. And people. I just gave a speech a couple of days ago in the South Bay of LA, and people were asking me why can't the U.S. do that? Well, number one, Israel's just like a little postage stamp in terms of landmass. It would take the U.S. Billions and billions of dollars, but the fact is we don't have that capability. We can't even protect without getting into too much information here. We can't even protect areas around Ukraine without getting into the no-fly zone thing. That's an issue that I know has been bandied about, kind of a political hot potato. And you and I understand how no-fly zones work and logistics that are required, and the refueling and the nations and the maintenance and the airfields. And I mean, it's not an easy task. I think a lot of liberals think you can just put up a curtain over the top of Ukraine and Russian jets will bounce off. Well, that doesn't work. It would be NATO pilots and probably American pilots that would be engaging Russian pilots. And then once you have one of those And once you have an instance, whether we shoot one down or they shoot one of us down, then you've got Article 5 of the NATO Convention Treaty, and then you got World War III. So it's a very complex situation, and I think that's why it's incumbent upon people like you and me to talk about, hey, what this actually means. I mean, a no-fly zone is difficult and very expensive at best, and it doesn't mean that there won't be incursions into the no-fly zone.
Buzz, I'm baffled at some of these so-called experts and smart people, and I know I ridicule them a lot because I consider myself an outsider, even though, I've been to the Pentagon for a tour on the Joint Staff and all that. But from the perspective of the elite, a foreign policy, national security elite system, and those folks, calling for a no-fly zone after the president has decided not to achieve nuclear deterrent parity, and even canceled his reliability shot missile test of the Minuteman III that we do every year to demonstrate readiness and reliability, which is key to nuclear deterrence. So we're basically operating naked. And then this week on President Biden's trip to Europe to NATO headquarters in Poland, he openly said, and I don't know if you've heard this yet, but he openly said that he would consider in extreme circumstances a first strike nuclear strike. He openly said that while on his trip to Europe. He's operating without being in the right posture. And that just opens us up to a first strike from Vladimir Putin, and him thinking, more importantly, that he can get away with it, like I said in my monologue.
And I think Putin thinks he can. And I hate to keep harkening back to Ronald Reagan and to President Trump, but Reagan was peace through strength, and Trump was peace through strength. And I just don't believe we'd be here right now if Trump was still the president or Reagan was the president. But so I don't. When you look at Biden's national security team, Rob, it's all the same people who were working for Obama and many of the same people who were working for Clinton. For example, when I was working for Clinton in 1996 and 1998, Susan Rice was in the NSC. Guess where Susan Rice is today? She's in the NSC. I mean, they keep perpetuating the same people. But you have Jake Sullivan, who was involved in the Russia hoax, being our National Security Council advisor. You're just not going to get that. We're gonna hold you guys to a standard, and then if you don't meet the standard, then we're gonna crush you. Biden's not going to say that. Biden's going to come home from Poland and go to bed and eat his ice cream, and we're going to have this problem. Unfortunately, I think it's going to be around for quite a while, the Ukraine problem, and I just don't see there being any fortitude in our current administration and the national security structure we have right now to hold Putin accountable or to hold anybody else accountable. Let's say, for example, Rob, that Putin tries to strike an airfield on the Ukrainian-Polish border and he hits something in Poland. So Poland's been attacked now. Then you've got NATO. And I don't think NATO is going to stick. There will be some countries that will say, yeah, we're going to go to war with Russia. There are going to be some that say, no, we're definitely not going to be. I don't know that the U.S. is even going to be there. I mean, we've been the biggest proponent of NATO since World War II and the biggest funder of NATO since World War II. And I don't know that Biden feels that firmly. I think he probably doesn't. And I can see Putin eventually getting control of Ukraine and installing a puppet government, and then we've got to deal with this for decades.
I'm laughing, but it's a nervous laugh because Biden, again, on his trip, before he said the thing about a nuclear first strike, he said that he would respond in kind to a chemical attack.
Yeah.
If Russia used chemicals inside Ukraine. I mean, and they've done a cleanup on aisle 5 on that recently. So, it's just we're operating without a net. We're naked on the wire, on the high wire, above the Grand Canyon, without a net. Because
can you imagine, Rob?
Can you imagine? of
Can you
increasing
imagine
our
this
model.
guy's? Can you imagine this? I'm talking about Biden and also Kamala Harris, who's a complete disaster. Can you talk? Can you imagine these kind of staffs being around us in the military? I mean, he's just they're not being taken care of. I mean,
Yeah.
they're of course they're both idiots, but I mean the staff is not doing a good job of keeping Biden on point. The one day Sullivan will say something, and then the next day Biden will say something totally different, and then Jim Psaki will say something completely different from what the other two said. I mean, we're not just. It looks like to me, and I remember this thinking this distinctly when I walked in the White House on my first day. So I had worked at the squadron level, the wing level,
Yeah.
headquarters level, and I'd never seen such a dysfunctional environment as I saw when I first walked into the Clinton White House. I mean, it was just, it was a frat party, and nobody kept anybody else accountable for him being on time or the message. Or now, fortunately for Clinton was pretty good on his feet.
Yeah.
Biden didn't have any of that, and
No.
Kamala Harris is even less than Biden has. So I kind of think that being around staffers for 2 years at the White House and actually having been one of those who was feeding Clinton notes prior to a speech, or riding in the limo and saying, "Okay, sir, you can talk about this, but you can't talk about that." We did that a few times.
Yeah.
I just don't think that Biden's getting that professional treatment that he needs, because I mean he's woefully inadequate in terms of that. And I don't know if you saw today, but he basically told our troops in Poland that they were going to Ukraine and this was the war they were going to encounter. So I don't know if you saw that today, but so that was either the biggest OPSEC violation in our nation's history, or the guy's just a blooming idiot.
That's
Or
generated
both.
another cleanup. The staff's been out there
Exactly.
saying,
They're going to
no,
have to
no,
figure
we
that
haven't
out. No, no, we're
changed.
not going to war with Ukraine. We're not going to go to war.
Yeah.
Now they got to clean that thing up.
Yeah.
And I used to be around these people. I understand how they work. I just can't imagine the chaos that's going around Biden right now. I just can't.
Well, and like you, I worked at the highest level in the Pentagon, and I was shocked when I heard what Milley did about President Trump. But I'm even more shocked to see that you have an obvious intellectually deficient, I won't say intellectually, but mentally deficient individual in the office of the presidency, and Milley hasn't said anything. He's
No.
obligated to say that. If he would say something about Trump
Yes.
publicly, then certainly he should be thinking, wow, this is really not
If
good.
he was having conversations with Pelosi under Trump about
Yeah,
taking away the nuclear capability of the
right,
president and the nuclear code. So they were actually having those conversations when Trump was the president. If
right.
they're not now, they are obligated to say, "Hey, listen, we understand there's an issue here. We get it." And I don't, there's no. Here's the problem with the nuclear, as you probably know, Rob. Here's the problem with the nuclear process: is there's no constitutional means to hand that responsibility off from the president to anybody else.
Sure isn't.
Only if the president's incapacitated. So if the president's incapacitated, the vice president also has a military aide who also has a nuclear football or
Yeah,
satchel, but that satchel is not activated until the president's satchel is. So the codes are different. The codes are different.
right.
So the only thing that could possibly happen is that we would give that responsibility to Kamala Harris. So where are we? If I'm the military aide, I'm saying I'd rather deal with Biden than deal with this, hyena. And then, I always factoring what would President Clinton think and what would he say. And he was pretty decent about the questions he would ask me. I hope those conversations are going on with Biden and his current military aide, because again, dude, I think we're kind of in 1968. We're kind of in the Cuban Missile Crisis
Yeah,
potential, in terms of if we back Putin, if Ukraine does win this war, we back Putin into a corner, Putin's going to come out like an injured dog, he's going to come out, he's going to do something, he's going to drop chemical, bio, or he's going to use a nuke, and it's probably going to be a tactical nuke, but he's going to use it, in my estimation.
yeah, and it's hard to get really good, solid information on what's going on with the negotiations. I'm starting to hear that they're coming to agreement on a lot of things, and then And then an hour later, I hear, no, the Ukrainians have said no, they're not going to do this or that, and all that, So that's what I'm concerned about. And you have all of these missteps happening
Yeah. Yeah.
at a time when we really are on the precipice, and we've chosen to self-inflict wound ourselves by not increasing our nuclear forces readiness and posture tactically, on the ground. So even though, the president says, hey, we're responding kind or whatever, you know what? If you get hit first and you're not ready already, you're not going to respond with much.
No,
And
no,
it's
you're
going to
not.
be the end.
And you're not. And you're exactly
No.
right. I think you're exactly right. And I think that, one of the things I found troubling about President Clinton, especially in terms of our war against terror, and I was there just post Somalia and Black Hawk Down, and I was there doing during a lot of the terror stuff, the bombings in Kenya and Nairobi,
Yeah.
in Tanzania. One of the things I always thought about President Clinton that really bothered me, was one of the reasons why I wrote my first book, was that he was risk averse. He didn't understand how to use the military. He didn't want to understand how to use the military. He didn't even, the questions sometimes he would ask me, Rob, about just basic military type stuff, were like, holy, you're the commander in chief and you don't know how, I would help him with that. But I think Biden is even more risk averse. I think Biden really wants this thing just to be on cruise control. And, the way he handled Afghanistan, which was, I think, probably I've done a lot of evacuation operations in my time in the military.
Mm-hmm.
You never take the shooters out first. You take the shooters out last.
Yeah.
And we took the shooters out first. And so, that kind of thing. And General Milley agreeing with that, and then agreeing with closing Bagram, and, and having this little airport downtown Kabul that we're going to try to get everybody out of. The whole thing just smacks of incompetence. And
we call that bass backwards in military terminology.
It's bass backwards.
And I'm with you again. Go back to Milley in Austin.
Yeah.
What the hell are these guys thinking? I'm sorry, but if it would have been me, my stars would have been on the table and said, "Hey, I'm not doing it this way, and I'm going to resign if you continue on this line of operation."
Absolutely.
And nobody's done that. But nobody's done that. And then when little Lieutenant Colonel Marine Stuart Scheller calls him out publicly, he gets railroaded out of the military. Loses his retirement.
The last guy I can remember, Rob, and I really respected the guy because he was my commander for a while in AMC, but General Ron Fogelman, he resigned under Clinton, and I was the military aide after the 737 crash in Croatia. That a buddy of mine was the pilot on, by the way. And I remember that Fogelman came out and said, no, we're not going to railroad all these guys at Ramstein. We're just not going to ruin their careers. And he was told, no, ruin their careers. And so he resigned. I think that's the last time anybody, 4 stars, ever stood up to this kind of administration. And we don't have the guys now. I don't know that I could actually be a pilot in today's Air Force. I think that I would just be biting my lip way too much.
Yeah.
I did what I was supposed to do when I was flying, but I think it's a different world now. And, you talked about earlier about, where are the political sympathies in our military today? When I served and you served, I bet it was 85-90% were probably conservative. I think that's changed dramatically. And I think that I think Clinton started it with kind of politicizing the Pentagon. Bush Jr. tried to stem it a little bit, and then Obama kicked it into overdrive. And then Trump didn't have a lot of time. He had 4 years. If he had 8 years, he would have probably done a significant cultural change to our military. But now Biden just got in hyperdrive. And, I don't know if you know who the group STARS is, but I'm working with STARS now because I know a lot of the guys and girls that are working there. But it's a group that's organized against, radicalism, neo-Marxism, and CRT, racism in the military. And it's time for people to stand up to that because it's very real when we are, I'm a value-added guy. What is, in our training, if I'm going to combat with a squadron, what can you do for me It'll give me my guys the best chance to succeed. And I don't think we're giving commanders that anymore. I think we're saying, okay, you got one hand tied behind your back. You've got this thing over here.
Yeah.
You got to worry about diversity. You got to worry about transgender, and you got to worry about CRT. And we're teaching it in our academies. I'm not an academy guy, but I was a commander there at the Air Force. So I understand. We're teaching that to our 18-year-olds, and that's going to affect the culture of the Pentagon and the military forever. And we are the greatest fighting force on the face of the planet, but we are not going to be if we let people like General Milley in Austin and Biden run our military. We're gonna be run into the ground, and we're not going to have capability. We're not going to be a great war fighting force. We're just not. We're going to lose wars.
Well, without accountability and without the ability to have a cohesive team, and what critical race theory is doing, folks, and my youngest son that was in the military has left active duty last August, and he was a staff sergeant in the Air Force. He told me that I would be shocked at what young men and women in the enlisted force are putting on social media. And it's not extremism to the right. It's extreme Marxism and those kinds of things. And that's why he got off active duty. And I'm on the advisory board for STARS. It's Stand Together Against Racism and Radicalism. In
you and I both, brother. So they're a great group.
Yeah, and I'm not an academy graduate either. But if our future leaders are being taught this crap, and to think through that lens, then that does not bode well for the success of the United States of America, let alone the armed forces in a fight.
Rob,
you mentioned it earlier. If you're my wingman, in our day, you have absolute trust in that individual, and you don't even think about whether they're even a woman, man, woman, black, white, yellow, purple, whatever. I don't care. I never cared. I didn't care. I was in the military under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I was in the military after Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I helped pick Ginger Rogers for Squadron Command. She was the Air Force colonel that set up in the box for Obama at his State of the Union when he did away with it. I never knew anyway, and I shouldn't have, and it didn't matter because that person, Colonel Rogers, I would have trusted to do the mission, and if she'd been on my wing, I'd know and have the 100% confidence that she was going to take care of the mission and get the job done, and I was in a good place. But when we're teaching our young men and women that if you're white, you're an oppressor, and if you're black, you're the oppressed, and you have this white privilege, and we teach that to those people, then when they're in combat, they don't trust each other. They're not really a team. They can't be. It's impossible when you're teaching people to think through that lens to have a cohesive combat team, and that is the recipe for failure.
And that's exactly why we're called the military, and exactly why we wear uniforms, is that we want to be uniform in our mission. We don't want to see, and I was raised in an Air Force family, so my dad retired as a 2-star. Mm-hmm. So he spent 33 years. So I was raised on bases across the world. And I was taught to never see anybody other than their character. That's how I was raised. And then when I came in the Air Force myself and became a commander, I felt the same way. I was like, okay, guys, guys and girls, we're here. This is what our mission is. And I always knew that 99% of those people were going to be well-trained. They were going to be, maybe not 99. Let's go 95. We're going to be well-trained, doing things for all the right reasons, never going to bitch or moan about something. There was always that, okay. So when I was the commander during the Bosnian War, we were flying in and out of Bosnia every single day. And I always took it upon myself to be the first airplane in and then the last airplane out. And so that nobody else could say, hey, Colonel P's not doing this, so why do I need to do this? So I tried to do all that. And people were, they were thankful. They bought in. We had a couple issues, but we got shot at a lot, but people were able to all come home. And that's kind of the bottom line. It's kind of, and so if we are teaching like your son, so my son is a sophomore in high school, he wants to go to the Air Force Academy. So, but he's looking at all this, and he's looking at what I'm doing with STARS. And he's going, maybe I don't want to do. He's a strapping 6'3" basketball playing stud who wants to be a
Yeah.
pilot in the Air Force. But now he's looking at what's happening at the academy, with people like George Takei being invited to speak and they made it a mandatory formation for all 4,000 cadets at the academy to go listen to this lunatic. And they didn't allow a conservative counter voice to what was going on. So my son brought that to my attention. Hey, Dad, did you see this?
Mm-hmm.
So, we're not, again, I think in terms of politics, Rob, and I think in terms of the military, we're not sending our best. We used to be. And there was a time like you and I, we never questioned the people that we worked with. We never questioned what the orders were, the mission. I never did. I always thought this is my role in life, and I'm going to do this, and that's why God put me here. But I think that a lot of the young guys and girls now in the military are thinking, this is not quite what I signed up for. And the diversity classes and the CRT stuff. I mean, we are losing our focus. The military is not a social petri dish. It is a lethal arm of the U.S. government, and we've got to remember that going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember I was an enlisted guy, and by the way, Colonel Ron Fogelman was the wing commander that signed my officer training school package. So,
oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, I got to see him after he resigned and retired and everything, and I thanked him for doing that resignation the way he did it, because he was right to do that. He was right.
He was right to do that. The Fogelmans and the Pattersons go back. So we were neighbors. My dad and he went to, and General Fogelman went to Vietnam together, and flew in Vietnam. So I've known the Fogelmans since I was probably, I haven't talked to him in 20 years, but since I was probably 12. Superb guy. And I was at the White House when he resigned, and I remember thinking, that he was the only guy of those 4 stars that I thought had any gumption and any ability to do that. I mean, Shelley Kashvili was the Joint Chiefs at the time, and just a complete liberal moron. But Fogelman had cojones, and he did it right, and he stepped down for all the right reasons. And I think I really do believe, Rob, he's probably the last guy in that kind of position that actually would step down and say, hey, I'm going to go sell porta potties in Durango, California. I think that's where he went. But so yeah, he was, and that's the kind of leadership that we have lost in our military. I mean, one of the reasons why I retired was that I saw all the wrong guys being promoted, and I was one of the guys being promoted, so I wasn't upset. But I saw a lot of the guys that I would go to war with in a heartbeat that weren't getting promoted, and a lot of guys that I didn't particularly think were operational commanders at all that were getting promoted. So I thought, I'm going to bail and go fly for Delta Airlines.
So that's that's the underpinning of where we're at right now. And this administration has left us with our nuclear forces at the same level they were after the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union went away, not on an alert status that's immediately available for all parts of what's called the triad, folks. That's bombers, land-based missiles, and sea-launched ballistic missiles from our big submarines. So if those forces aren't all at the same parity as the Russians' forces, then we're at a disadvantage, and that actually is an escalatory move.
Very much so.
So as we wind this up, Buzz, what do you think is going to happen if this negotiation effort isn't successful under these conditions with this type of force?
Well, I don't. I agree, Rob. We should have raised our posture, nuclear posture, immediately. And if we don't, we better have guys and girls on alert in cockpits, and guys in missile silos, ready to turn keys, because I don't think it will come to that. I do think, however, we're going to have a cataclysmic event in Ukraine at some point if the Ukrainians are continued to repel Putin. And one thing that's really got me interested, I've done a lot of planning as you have and strategizing over the years in the military. one thing that's really kind of perplexed me is the fact that Russia hasn't gained air superiority after a month. I thought that would be just a done deal, 48 hours, but they're still having a hard time with getting the airspace. And I think that, with us providing stingers and that kind of thing, that's gonna push this out a while. I do believe. I think it might be another Russian Afghanistan. Ultimately, I think that Russia, if we don't, and I hope we don't involve U.S. Troops on the ground and in the air over Ukraine. I hope we don't go there, because I think that would be cataclysmic as well. But I think we're going to have a situation where Putin eventually overtakes Zelensky and just installs a puppet government. We have this entity that we have to deal with now on the border of Poland, and I know Poland doesn't want that. So, I mean, interesting times, right? But I think that we're right on the verge. I think we're on the verge of something that could be really, really bad, and I hope they come to an agreement, but I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I think I think the Ukrainians have put up a good enough fight that Putin may actually end up right where I predicted he was going to do. If he was going to invade, I actually was wrong. I didn't think he was going to invade based on the open source stuff I was seeing. But I did always caveated that with, well, if he's going to invade, he's going to take the Donbass, the two breakaway republics, and solidify that into Russia, because the people voted for that at one point or another, is what his excuse will be. And he's making that kind of noise right now. I don't know if the Ukrainians will agree to that. If they're smart, they'll figure out how to agree to it, because if they don't, if we go down that thread, I agree with you. There's something catastrophic is going to happen to that. And if they do, then Putin won't be able to overcome Zelensky and the rest of Ukraine. And at worst, they'll adopt neutrality, but still maintain an ability to defend themselves if they need to. And they'll stop the silliness of wanting to join NATO, and NATO will say it out loud, which could have prevented all of this, in my opinion. So that's where I think we're at. I hope that's where we're at, because to think otherwise, or for it to have another outcome, then eventually, because the Russians are doing what the Soviet army did. Their tactics really haven't changed. When they go all in, they just pummel down the bricks and the rocks and the concrete until it's flat, and that kills a lot of people, but there's no resistance left.
Well, they're still fighting,
run or they're dead.
They're still fighting World War II. The Russians still fight the same way they fought in World War II. They have no centralized. Well, they have a centralized command and control of their jets, but they don't let the guys and girls do their own thing, and they don't entrust them with the responsibility to do the right thing, and that's why the Russian Air Force doesn't fly a lot at night. There's not that quality, has it? Yeah,
we had these discussions when we were captains, folks.
Exactly, they're still doing the same thing. Yeah,
when the Soviets existed, they're still doing the same thing, and that explains why they haven't. Why that airspace is still contested. The Ukrainians still have an air force. I'm shocked that they still have an air force, quite frankly, because I thought the Russians had gotten better than that. And from a positive perspective, from my perspective, I've been calling for reductions in the defense budget for a long time, because we're built for a 25-year war in Afghanistan and spending that level, and they just increased it by $100 billion. But now that we know they're so crappy, we don't have to spend as much on defense, because we've only got to really worry about China, and that's because they have the numbers, quite frankly.
Absolutely.
So I could see that, and I know it doesn't bode well for you neocons out there, but I can see a really good avenue of logic and good debate going down the trail of, we don't need to spend all this money on defense. Look how terrible those people were. And maybe even a elimination of NATO at some point in the near future, like probably what should have happened, a restructure of the security environment in Europe, which includes Russia, which is probably what should have happened after 1991, and didn't happen, unfortunately. And I think we made a huge misstep there.
I totally agree. If I can just share one quick anecdote before we cut off, Rob. I was the second Air Force pilot to land in Ukraine after the Iron Curtain came down. So this is 1994, 3, I think. So I was landing and I, we had this built up narrative about the Soviet military, right?
Yeah.
So I'm landing at this MiG base, fighter base south of Kiev called Stry. And as soon as I touched down, I realized that the runway was crap. It was, they had made just these 1 meter blocks of concrete, and I thought that every bolt in the airplane was going to shake out of the airframe, the fuselage, and fall onto the. It was that bad, and I remember pulling off and going, "We were worried about this." That was my first inclination. Was these guys they're not all that. They're just not. But we were led to believe, and we had to suspect the worst, right? So we prepared for their best, but I just don't think that Russia's a big gas station, and they don't have a lot of money. And what they do, they put into oligarchs and also to their military, but the military still hasn't come very far.
No, it apparently hasn't, because it appears the stories about them struggling are bearing out to be true, and that's why they're coming to the table, I think.
Absolutely. I think so too.
Which is good news. I'd like to see it come to a conclusion and end as rapidly as possible, because, as you know, war is the worst thing that human beings can do to each other, and a lot of kids and families are dying and being broke up and those kind of things.
Looks like World War II. If you look at, if you're watching the news, it looks like World War II in color. Right?
Sure does.
The refugees and the destruction, and it doesn't look good. And I mean, I'm really kind of surprised. I was like you. I thought, well, if Putin does invade, I don't think he will. He'll take Donbass and he'll retreat. And but he didn't. So here we are.
He went all in, but now the generals are saying, no, we're done with our objectives, and we're just going to focus on eastern Ukraine. So let's see where it goes from here. Well, thanks, Buzz. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Where can people find you? And I know you're a spokesman for Restore Truth Token. I just found that out. So if you want to say something about those guys, I'm sure they would appreciate it. But where can folks find you on social media and everything?
Yeah, if I'm all over all the places. Rob and I have known each other on Twitter for a long time, so I'm at Buzz Patterson on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, same handle, same call signs. RTT, Restore Truth Token, is a phenomenal new idea where we have a crypto company that's going to raise money for conservative issues. So they're out there supporting MAGA candidates, they're supporting MAGA organizations, they're supporting military organizations, and they're doing it online. They also have a new news source coming online, which is unblockable, uncensorable. So there's that. So Restore Truth Token on Twitter is the place to go. RTT at RTT, and I'm there as well. And again, Rob, it's great. We finally got together after all these years. I think we need to do like a scotch and a cigar meeting with Schleister and some of these other idiots that we know on social media that we're all brilliant military thinkers in our own minds. So I think we should get together and do a thing together, and that would be a blast.
Well, we'll work on that. Folks, just as a promotion, I'll have the CEO of Restore Truth Token on the show in a couple of weeks, and I look forward to that because I'm in learning mode about this whole crypto stuff and Bitcoin and that kind of thing. So, Buzz, thank you very much, my friend. Thank you for your service, your continued service. My best to your family, and hope to see you soon in person, and we can have that scotch and cigar really fast.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, Rob. Take care. We'll see you.
Bless. Yep. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was retired Colonel Buzz Patterson, former military aide to Bill Clinton, carrier of the nuclear football. It was a great discussion that we had, but here's where we're at. It looks like there are negotiations that are moving forward between Ukraine and Russia, but the United States and NATO has a lot of forces in the Eastern European flank of NATO, Poland, Romania, the Baltics, those kinds of areas, and anything could happen because this administration has made the poor decision, the absolute worst decision it could make, and not kept us at nuclear parity with the world's largest nuclear armed nation as far as nuclear forces go, and that's Russia. And a lot of folks need to be paying attention, because one slight misstep could lead us down the road to not just a conventional World War III, but a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia, and maybe even include China in that if it got really nasty. And we don't need that. What we need is to have a strong military and be strong and be resolved, and let Putin know that if he does anything, that he will be destroyed, and we're not doing that right now. So pray for peace, pray for the Ukrainians, pray for the families, the kids, and pray for the people that are losing their lives on the side that you don't support. And I know a lot of Americans have chosen sides in this. My heart's with the Ukrainians, but I'm not picking a side in this. There's bad actors on both sides. Pray for them all. Pray for the moms and dads that are losing their sons and daughters, and pray for the little kids that have lost their lives, and hope that we will get out of this without the conflagration that's put higher potential than I've seen in my lifetime in my 30-something years of military service. Until next week, I'm retired Colonel Rob Maness.